Hi, friends. Welcome to The Evolving Leader. I'm Scott Allender. I'm here with John Gomes. And John, I have been buzzing for a couple of weeks now, ever since we got to finally be together in person. I've been dreaming of this for 4 years, that we would sit down in person and have an in-person guest as well. And we finally got to do it. And the conversation was so rich. But before we share that conversation with our listeners, I just want to check in with you and see how you're feeling, and also reflections you might have had on the conversation, any contextualization you might want to do to set it up.
Yeah, well, like you, I'm feeling really great about that day when we spent talking to some guests in person for the first time, which was fantastic. I think, what I'm feeling is this sense of connection with the first time I started really deeply looking at the science of interoception. And I got this buzz when I started doing this probably 7 or 8 years ago, really, when I kind of recognized that this was a really underappreciated source of knowledge. Now, because there's ancient wisdom around this idea, and it's been a perennial thing. But for the science to start talking to us about how this inner sense from our bodies actually translates into better decision making, better rational processes is quite counterintuitive. And also then the slew of evidence around how interoception can improve anything from, kind of anxiety and autism and ADHD to, judgment under stressful decision making. It just feels to me that this is an explosion of consciousness that's about to happen, because we all need, as rational people in business, we all need a scientific or a rational evidence base to finally believe what we've probably known intuitively for a long time. So to have Caroline on the show and doing some really brilliant research into this area amongst the world specialists was phenomenal, bringing all that together. How are you feeling?
I mean, the conversation was so rich, and as you say, it's permeated so much of your work and mine as well in the workshops I do with people and trying to help them make better sense of the decisions they make and how they frame situations. And so I just think this is such an important conversation for leaders everywhere to really lean into, because this isn't just some academic discussion without application. This is, critical if we want to maintain a sense of well-being, pay attention to how we're actually really feeling, being able to pull apart physical sensations from emotional experience and understand how the two are related, as well as to pay better attention to what our teams are feeling and the sort of challenges we face in a world that's just moving faster and faster than ever before, with more ambiguity and just unknown. So I invite everybody to listen in, lean in. This is a really rich conversation, so let's share it with them now. Caroline, it's so good to be with you again. It's been like 3 years since we've spoken. How have you been since then?
I have been okay. I've been spent at least one of those 3 years locked away, typing frantically, a little bit of travelling as well. So, yeah.
So, Caroline, welcome to the show. A crucial question for you. How are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling a lot of things at the moment. I'm feeling very excited to be able to talk interoception with people who actually are interested about it, because I've been on my own in this for a while, apart from the lovely scientists who've been telling me about it. But also I'm really passionate about how important it is for the understanding of the mind, and I feel this huge responsibility to get it across, and slightly nervous about doing the subject justice in a clear way. So I'm feeling a lot of things, I think it's fair to say.
Excellent. Well, welcome in. This is our first in-person, face-to-face interview we've done in 4.5 years of The Evolving Leaders. So we're so glad to have a favored guest from season 2, I think it was, back in 2022, I think it was. Yeah. Are you still, so for our listeners that haven't heard your work yet or watched that episode, maybe we just start with a little bit about your background, how you came to do the work that you do, and then we'll dive into your most recent work, which we're excited to talk with you about.
Okay, so I'm a science journalist. I've been doing it now for like 25 years, which is kind of scary. And the background, I came from a biology degree, and then I was one of those weird people at uni who actually enjoyed doing essays and writing stuff up. And so from there I thought, I really like to do this for a living. Is there such a thing? It turns out there is such a thing as being a science writer. And so a slightly circuitous route, I kind of ended up doing that. So I've been an editor at New Scientist, feature editor at New Scientist, specializing in neuroscience initially. And for a lot of the time I was covering neuroscience, that involved looking at the head, the brain, and nothing else. And then gradually it started to shift towards thinking of the brain being part of a bigger system, the body. So that kind of took me to Move, which is my book I spoke to you about in 2022, which is all about why moving our body can act as a hotline to our minds and change the way we think and feel in really important ways. And then that took me further into the body, brain, mind rabbit hole and into interoception, which is what we're talking about today and why that matters for our minds and our mental health and our understanding of ourselves.
Well, we touched on interoception when we talked to you about Move, right? The interplay between the body and the mind. But let's just start with the definition, because I'm sure our listeners many of them are saying, intro what? What are you saying? Right. So let's just start. What is interoception?
Yeah, it's not a great word for it, really. I've kind of spoken to all scientists over this process and saying it does need a rebrand, doesn't it? Because you tend to say the word and people glaze over, like it sounds like it's something that an accountant made up or something. But it's quite simple, really. Interoception is a catch-all term for how we sense, perceive, and interpret signals from inside our body. So the senses you will learn about at school, which is, sight, sound, all those are exteroceptive. They're receiving the outside, the external world. Interoceptive sensation is anything that happens inside the body. So it covers everything from heartbeat to stomach sensations to muscle tension to pain, and more sort of vaguer sort of sensations like how much energy you feel you have. Do you feel on edge or do you feel confident? These are all based on interoceptive change sensations within the body.
So you start the book talking about the fact that we've got this kind of rather detached view, both in science and in wider kind of literature and on society, between the brain and the body. And that, kind of goes back to people like René Descartes who, kind of tried to separate that out. And so where are we today in terms of that? Is that still the case, or do you think we're making progress?
Definitely making progress, but I think the difficulty is most obvious when the fact that we're talking about body-brain connections, the fact that we talk about the body and brain as if they're two separate things, and that does go back to sort of Descartes' day, and the idea that the mind was something immeasurable and ethereal and not physical at all, and the body was a physical thing, and that these two things were totally separate. And then over the years, there have been some attempts to put the body and the mind back together. So William James, who's known as the father of psychology, and Carl Lang, so there's a theory, the James Lang theory of emotion. So they were back in 1880s. They put forward the idea that our emotions are an interpretation of what's going on in the body. So our heart doesn't beat because we feel scared because our heart is beating. So that was brought up a long time ago. But at the time, we didn't have the understanding. So people pushed back on it and said, well, hang on a minute. All these things that are happening in the body, that's far too slow and squelchy, and nothing as exciting as what's going on in the brain. So it all kind of got shoved to a side. And it was only in the 90s that people picked this idea back up. And it's slowly becoming better known in neuroscience. But, it's still the case where if you're interested in the mind, largely you go into neuroscience and you study the brain. So there's work to do, but it feels like there's a tipping point happening where neuroscientists are going, all right, so our brain's attached to the body and starting to look deeper.
Let's talk more about why that matters, because, I think in the West, as you're saying, we hero the mind, right? It's the only intelligence that we care about, and we think it sits independent of everything, right? We've got heads on a stick, that we could take our brains out of our heads off our bodies, attach them to a robot, and it'd all be the same. We'd have the same level of consciousness, all these kinds of things that really aren't true, are they? So why is it important that we understand what's happening in our body? Why does that matter?
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole point that we have the brain, so the idea that our bodies evolved and then the brain was kind of plonked on later as an afterthought is just not the way evolution works. So we started off as little blobs sort of moving around way back in the primordial soup, and the the basis, the non-negotiable for survival is to be able to withstand changes that happen in the outside world and buffer those changes and carry on and survive. So the way I put it in the book about, this idea of homeostasis, being able to get back to some kind of a balance of whatever's happening. We think of Earth as being this kind of Mother Earth, but it's not as if Mother Earth cares whether we survive or not. She's not the mother going, "Are you okay, dear? Have you got enough to eat? Have you got a water bottle with you? Are you warm enough?" Life exists on Earth because it found a way to buffer the outside world, change something on the inside and get on with it. And as bodies evolved to become more complicated, the nervous system came along to keep track of all that. And in our branch of the evolutionary tree, that ended up in a very complex brain that talks amongst itself as well as taking all this information from the body. And so we've got this complex back and forth going on. So the idea that the mind is somehow not of the body doesn't make any sense, because the whole point of these changes matter, because what they're telling us, if our heart is beating faster, they're telling us that our body is prepared for action. If there's a change in how concentrated our blood is, maybe we need to take in some water to drink. So these are motivating sensations. And the reason that we've become aware of them is because we need to do something about it. Otherwise, we're going to die. So they're the foundation of our feelings about whether to do something, whether they're good or bad. Approach good things, get away from bad things, and also motivate our behaviors. Otherwise, we would probably just sit in a cave, napping a flint thing and just die of starvation, because you need the motivation to get out and find ways to survive. So everything that we think, everything we feel, the decisions we make is all built on these changes in our bodies that tell us what to do and why.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really fascinating that, the idea that the brain's principal mission is just to keep us alive. It's not to do all these higher orders of thinking. So it would be really helpful to try and get an understanding of how in terms of what you've learned about how interoception really informs the higher orders of thinking. And so that, that our listeners can get a real understanding of why this matters to them in their everyday kind of work.
Yeah, so the kind of higher order stuff came along to make us even better at working out what to do. So it's sort of taking sort of 2 and 2 and putting it together to make 5. So, I mean, some of these things sort of happened by accident and we've kind of inherited them. So it's not like they were there for this reason. But so our brain cares a lot about what's going on in the heart. So things that happen on a heartbeat affect what we're likely to remember, what we notice. So if something scary happens when your heart is contracting, you're more likely to notice it and you're faster to move away from it. So, and if your heart is beating faster, you're more likely to notice things in the environment that are threatening. So there's been some experiments looking at racial bias, where are people likely to see someone with either a tool or a gun in their hand and assume it's a gun based on their race. And if someone's heartbeat is beating faster, they are much more likely to jump to the conclusion it's a bad thing. So racial biases are much stronger if somebody's agitated, which seems like something people should know in this day and age. Also, memory is affected by what's going on in your body, motivation. If you're feeling anxious, then you're going to respond differently to another way. And also how motivated you are depends on things like a body-brain assessment of what it is you have to do, how much energy you have in the tank, how much it's going to cost you, is it worth it? So there's this whole thing going on that affects whether you have it in you to do whatever you have to do. So there's just being aware that you have this body that is affecting the way you think and how you feel about things. I think is in and of itself kind of important.
But we're not often that conscious of it, are we? Right. So we think we're making a logical decision, in a boardroom perhaps, and we may be unaware that we're depleted, right? Our bodies are sending us signals, so we feel that the idea before us is nonsense, it's the wrong thing to do, we're agitated, as you said. What did your research reveal in terms of how the differences of people's sensitivity to their interoception and what we can do to develop more sensitivity?
Yeah, so that's a really important point because we all vary in how sensitive we are, and sometimes that can be just, like genetic variation, where like you either have great eyesight or not good eyesight, and sometimes it can be as a response to life experience. So if you were brought up expecting the world to be a dangerous place, you're going to be it might make you more sensitive to your interoceptive signals. It might make you have been overwhelmed at some point and shut them down, and so you're totally unaware of what's going on. So we all vary for various reasons. But what's interesting is that research suggests that if you can learn to more precisely feel what's going on in your body and interpret it and be curious about what it means and interpret it accurately, then you can actually get better at that. And that can have all kinds of knock-on effects about, into your self-regulation, your understanding of yourself, your relationship with others, because empathy is based on physical changes in somebody else's body that you're picking up on, and then that sort of mirrors it in your own body. So you're physically feeling what other people are feeling to a lower extent. So it affects your sense of self, your relationship with others, how you think, and how you cope with changes, and whether you know what's driving those feelings within your body. So one example I think of is, and it's happened to me, you can meet somebody and you can think, they're giving me bad vibes. I just don't like this person. And it might be that your intuition is picking up on something really not nice about that person. You absolutely should go with your gut and not trust them. It could also be that they really remind you of someone who was a horrible teacher in your life, or someone who bullied you or something like that, and you're reacting to that. And it's happened to me when I've been like, I don't like that guy. And then it turns out they're actually a lovely person, and what you're reacting to isn't appropriate. So having this kind of more granular sense of what you're feeling and what's causing that can be really sort of informative.
There's a lot of kind of focus on the vagus nerve right now, and you see a lot of social media influencers talking about stimulating their vagus nerve and so on. Can you talk to us about the role that plays in interoception and why we should be thinking about it?
Yeah, well, there are three main pathways, interoceptive pathways, and the vagus nerve is a really important one. So we think of that as the interoceptive superhighway. So the vagus nerve, it sort of comes at the bottom of the brain, and it winds through the body. So vagus means wandering. It's the wandering nerve, and it doesn't go down the spinal column with all the other sensory nerves. It kind of checks in with all the organs along the way. And a lot of the attention about the vagus nerve has been in its role in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite to the sympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, ready self for action. Parasympathetic, calm down, everything's rest and digest, chill. And so a lot of the talk about the vagus nerve has been about, okay, you can stimulate it and that calms the body, which is all fine. But the parasympathetic arm of the nervous system takes up about 20% of the fibers in the vagus nerve, which is 100,000 nerves strong. It's a great big bundle of nerves, not just one nerve. The other 80% are sensory nerves, so for interoceptive signals that run from the body to the brain. And we know a lot less about them. So there's one researcher, Stephen Liberles, who's looking into this, and he calls it the dark matter of the vagus nerve, because there's all this stuff. There's a lot of things that are being sensed by the vagus nerve that we don't even know what they're doing. Weird things like there's some sensory nerves that detect light within our fat, and just all kinds of weird stuff that they're finding, and a lot of it. There's a lot still to know about what happens in the vagus.
Still hope for you. Yeah.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot going on in there. So the vagus nerve is hugely, hugely important. And the reason it's really interesting is because if you can tweak those signals, so some of the signals come from the stomach, fullness sensations, and some of the the gut-brain interactions, they all run along the vagus nerve. So if you can get in there, and there has been some studies where there's been some stimulation by the stomach in the vagus nerve, can you affect appetite? Can that be used to treat obesity? Can you change some of the sort of gut-brain interactions that underlie things like IBS? Because that's very much an interoceptive. The brain affects the stomach affects the brain. It's all back and forth. So there's a lot of interest in, can we harness, once we know exactly what these signals are and where they're going and what they're doing, can we then harness them to improve health in new ways?
What's your take on that, given what you've researched? Do you think that's viable?
it's very early days, but the vagus nerve stimulation for appetite, treating obesity, does seem to be kind of quite promising. So as an alternative, I mean, it is still invasive. Obviously, they have to go in, but it's less invasive than a gastric band, for example. So you're not having a whole part of your stomach taken out. But that does seem to be quite promising. There's the trouble with the vagus nerve at the moment. We've got researchers who I went to see who are trying to map all of these 100,000 fibres. And it's going to take them a little while, but they're on the way. Until then, it's very difficult because you've got this bundle of 100,000 fibres. Some of them are going body to brain, some of them are going to brain to body. How you target those is very tricky. So there's a lot of hype about vagus nerve stimulation, putting something on your ear, and that's going to calm you down, and that's going to make this, that, and the other happen. I don't think we're there yet.
No. What would the role of the brain, like the brain's predictions, wouldn't that factor into whether or not the stimulating of the vagus nerve would have the impact that we'd want, right? So because we've had Lisa Feldman Barrett on the show, we've talked about sort of the brain as a predictor and the disconnect between what the body experiences. So I'm just curious to know more about what you're seeing there.
Well, this is the thing. So I think the interventions that are being looked at, see it very much as a loop. So you've got the brain predicting what's happening in the body, and then the body's the incoming signals either back that up. And if they do, then not much really happens and you're probably not aware of it. If they don't, there's a clash, and then you become aware of it, something happens. But this is very much a back and forth. And so the idea is, can you intervene somewhere in that system and change the signal? So then if you're changing the bottom up signal from the body, then that will feed into the brain's predictions, and then will that, tip things in the right direction. So that's the idea. Like, if you can find the right bit to intervene. But yeah, you're right. You need to change the whole thing, because if the brain, and in some of the experiments that I took part in, one was looking at perception of the breath, and because the sensation of having enough air to breathe is sort of a non-negotiable for the brain. It's not, if you don't feel like you've got enough air coming in, that's urgent and important, so you know about it. But if that changes, how able are people to change the brain's predictions and update it based on the new information coming in? So this is relevant to things like post-traumatic stress. So do you look around and go, actually, I'm objectively in a calm, safe environment here, and downgrade the panic signal? Or do you go with what you've learned the hard way and it goes up? And so this experiment I took part in, I was actually really surprised. They primed either a hard breath or a easy breath through a snorkel tube. They primed it with a beep. So it was either a high-pitched beep or a low-pitched beep. There was a learning phase, and I pretty quickly deduced that a high-pitched beep meant easy breath, low-pitched, not so nice. And then after a while, they switched it up, but I didn't know this. And they asked me to press a button, did you feel it being a restricted breath? And did you expect that based on the beep? And after I'd learnt that the high-pitched was the easy breath, they switched it up, and I was very slow to relearn that connection wasn't there anymore. And in fact, a third of the time, I felt a difficult breath when there was not one there, and I felt an easy breath when they were restricting the oxygen. So my brain was predicting, no, you've learnt this the hard way. This is, yeah. And afterwards, I was as shocked as everybody else, because it should have been easy. But your predictions do play in, and some people are better at shifting their allegiance back to what the body is saying, and other people are more flexible. So being flexible to update what's going on inside your body, outside the body, and sort of putting this all together is what we mean by good interoception.
Yeah. We talk about the connection that the vagus nerve has with the insular cortex, and how that kind of affects our executive function and thought processes, because that's a very important relationship.
Yeah. So it's kind of the insula's the most important bit of the brain that most people have never heard of, basically. So there's so I've talked about the vagus nerve. There's other inputs as well. You've got all the spinal nerves, which they go to the organs, but they also go throughout your whole body through the muscles and fascia and everything else. And then you've got the chemical changes in the blood, the hormonal changes, the inflammation markers, all these kind of things, and they all go to the same place. The first stop is the brainstem, which for some things we already know, and I think it's probably going to turn out a lot. There's like a dial in there where it kind of things either get escalated or kind of regulated down again. So the brainstem's the first important part. And then it goes on to the thalamus, which is a kind of switchboard, and then on to the insular. So the insular is really important because it's where the bottom-up signals come in, and the top-down signals, which is all the cognitive stuff, all the expectations and stuff, and all the emotions and the sensory stuff from outside, they all get put together. And that's where the magic happens. And somehow, I think it's fair to say, we don't know exactly how, this is where the sort of sense, the inner sense of me here now, this is how I feel, comes from. So it's kind of like the hub. So everything from your perception of time, how you feel, all this is dealt with by the insular. And the insular is connected to lots of parts all over the brain. So, and it's a really fascinating bit of the brain. So if you want to know where it is, it's kind of above your ear. And if you were to go pull your fingers really deep in, pull your brain apart in the two folds, it's right down the bottom, one on each side. Fascinating bit.
And there's some interesting research that shows that when people have that strong interoception, their judgment under stress starts to improve. What have you seen there in the work that you've been doing?
So it's interesting that the thing that's tempting to think is that we should all be more aware of our body signals, and that isn't necessarily a good thing. So, for example, if somebody has a heart arrhythmia and they didn't know about it, and the doctor tells them they've got a heart arrhythmia, they can become too focused on their heart signals. Similarly, in eating disorders, people become hypersensitive to the sensation of food in their stomach, and it's horrible. And so sometimes you don't want more sensitivity, sometimes you want less sensitivity. And researcher Sarah Garfinkel, who's one of the the big people in this area of research, and Hugo Critchley, they found that what's important isn't necessarily how sensitive you are, it's how much you think you are sensing the signal and how much you are. The difference between those two makes a difference. So if you think you're really sensitive and you're not, that can relate to...
So it's the accuracy of...
Yeah. So you might think you're really sensitive and you're not, or you might think you're not and you really are. And so bringing those two things together, and what Sarah Garfinkel's done is some training where she's trained people to be more sensitive to their heartbeat. So it's quite simple, really, in many ways. You get people to raise their heartbeat doing a little bit of exercise, and then almost everyone can feel their heartbeat. And then you get people to pay attention to it as it slows down. And in the studies, they give them a bit of feedback about how well they're doing. And over time, it's interesting because they get better at detecting their own heartbeat, but they become less aware of it consciously. So these are people who had anxiety. And so when they felt their heart rate normally, it was like, oh my God, it's a bad thing. They became less aware of it, partly because that escalation to this is something important, you need to do something about it, didn't happen at a lower sort of unconscious level. It had all been sort of regulated. So in some ways, what you want is the equivalent of potty training. So you want to know there's an issue, what the issue is, go and deal with it, get on with your day. And so you don't spend all day going,
So it's a kind of balance. You don't want the extreme. You don't want to be cut off to it. You want to be somewhere.
And as Sarah Garfinkel says, it's not good to be too in your body. You want to be living in the world, but you want to have access to it when you need it.
Yeah, that's a good distinction to make, I think. Yeah.
And to be able to interpret it. So if you know what it means, then it won't necessarily go out of control.
Can we talk a bit about the role of emotion and sort of delineating between the sort of physical sensation? We've talked a lot about the body-brain connection, but you mentioned anxiety, right? And so anxiety can, produce all sorts of emotions, right? Because it's a physiological thing happening, right? You're having this anxiety experience, and then you might feel all sorts of things about it, or emotions could be fueling it, right? So can you pull apart the importance of delineating between physical sensation and emotion?
Yeah, I mean, this is Lisa Farben-Barrett's thing, isn't it? Like she would be the best person to talk about this, but I'll do my best. So the idea is that the interoceptive sensations, they are driving our feelings. They make us feel something. So the whole point of them is they make us feel something, they motivate us. The emotion, this is Lisa Farben-Barrett's idea, and a lot of people agree with her, is the interpretation of what those feelings mean. So the classic example is you feel like this. Are you excited or are you anxious? Like it could be either. And your interpretation of it is informed by your predictions, is informed by your situation. Are you about to go and give a big talk to some people, or are you about to go and do something really exciting? And sometimes it'd be difficult to tell those two things apart when you're about to go on a roller coaster. Are you excited or are you terrified? I don't know, but I feel a lot. And so, yeah, the emotions are the way we make sense of these feelings. The feelings are there, whatever. But in theory, you can interpret them differently. So what Lisa Feldman-Barrett told me when I spoke to her was the important thing is to be curious. You know, you notice these sensations. What might it mean? Am I feeling this because I'm in danger? Am I feeling galvanized? Am I feeling overconfident? Should I be feeling this confident? No, just not even be critical of what you're feeling, but at least to notice it and be open to the idea that maybe you're not feeling what you think you're feeling. Yeah, at least give it some time to breathe before you decide that you desperately hate that person. Well, actually, they're just making me feel a bit nervous because they remind me of my science teacher or whatever.
I think that's so important what you just said about curiosity, right? It's like that's a good anchoring point to come back instead of reacting to what's happening so quickly, or making assumptions, just staying curious. Like, what is this physical sensation in my body? What is this emotion I'm feeling? What's the story behind that? All of those kinds of things.
Exactly. I think in the world we live in at the moment, it's a really important skill to have because, you know, it just feels like the existential threats just keep coming at us, you know, pandemics and climate change and the world's going to hell. You know, there's all, 24-hour rolling news. We're bombarded with all this stuff and most of it feels really scary. And so we're feeling all these things.
Yeah.
And that can make us react in all kinds of weird ways, whether it makes us withdrawn and feel hopeless or whether it makes us feel galvanized to go out and do something about this. When we see this sort of polarization in society, people are just emotionally activated and yelling at each other. And no one is, really thinking about why am I feeling this way? What exactly am I angry about here? And so one thing that's quite interesting to do is if there's something that's making you feel something from the news, look at it from different outlets with different political persuasions. Does that one make you feel angry? Does that one make you feel galvanized? Does this one make you feel hopeless? Like what are you feeling about this? And what can you do about it? And the answer might be, actually, I can't do anything about it. I'm just going to process that emotion and go, God, it feels scary to being a grown-up in this day and age. But just being aware that this is going on, because the risk is if you're not tuned in with what's going on, you can be dragged around by your emotions very easily and acting in ways that maybe doesn't align with how you really feel.
One thing that we seem to be inevitably always feeling is exhausted and depleted. Is there anything in the work in interoception that can help us to kind of combat that or think about it differently?
Yeah, because I think, 1 in 5 people, according to various statistics, complains of being tired all the time. And doctors see it all the time. They write TATT, abbreviate it. It's so common, they can't even bother to write it down anymore. Tired all the time. And we're talking about in otherwise healthy people, we're not talking about chronic fatigue. But the research into the interoceptive basis of energy or subjective vitality is how it's sort of studied, could inform treatments for things like problematic fatigue. So it's just the idea of thinking of it as a body-brain assessment of what you've got in the tank. So this goes back to Lisa Feldman-Barrett's body budgeting, so which you all know about. So the brain is constantly trying to work out what you can afford to do, and if you can't afford to do what you need to do, or if it's really not worth it, and there's it's not worth depleting your energy for, what comes out of that assessment is a lack of motivation. You don't want to do it. You feel exhausted. So the idea we have, I think, what all the doctor can really offer at the moment is, are you eating properly? Are you sleeping well? Are you doing some exercise? And you might be doing all those things, but you might still get up in the morning and go, oh God, it's just too much. And that could be an outcome of many, many things. And it can be a sort of a bottom-up problem. Is it that, so there's really interesting research looking into what the mitochondria are doing in the cells, releasing energy within the cells, and what that has to do with the energy that you feel that you have. And the answer is quite a lot. So studying people with mitochondrial diseases that affect how they can release energy shows that we do have a way of feeling when we are low on energy physically. And lots of things can contribute to that. It can be lack of exercise, that we're not actually powering up our mitochondria. We haven't got really good, efficient mitochondria going on. There could be lots of reasons why. You could be eating too much sugar, which overwhelms the mitochondria, and they end up chucking out less energy, not more.
I told you to stop eating so much sugar.
Yeah, it really does backfire. It's a really miserable thing to say, no, and then you want to reach the chocolate bar, but don't. I mean, do it anyway, but notice that you're tired afterwards.
Then you go to bed.
Yeah, and then go to bed. Or it could be, it could be that you have to go and see somebody, and the thought of being in that meeting with someone who just drains you just know it's going to be hard. That prediction is actually draining your energy that you need to get through that situation. So seeing it as a kind of partially sort of top-down thing and a partial bottom-up thing, you have a better chance of thinking, okay, what's going on here? And trying to find a way around it. So one interesting thing is, how do you feel when you're with people that make you feel energized and enthusiastic and like everything's worth doing? Spend more time with them if you possibly can. The people that drain you and are just like, make you just feel like you cannot be bothered, keep them at arm's length mentally. Even that can make a real difference to how energized you feel in everyday life. And when you're feeling exhausted at the end of a day, can I be bothered to meet that friend for a drink? Maybe you can, because they will make you feel 10 times better when you've done it. So yeah, I think this idea of just thinking, why am I so tired? Having this idea that, well, it's partly brain, it's partly body, and it's the interaction between the two, at least opens up the possibility that you might be able to do something about it, or at least not get too dragged down by the idea that you feel terrible and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. Let's stay with it a minute longer in a sort of organizational context, right? Because you might not have the option to sort of say, I'm going to stay away from that person because they suck the life out of me, right? Yeah, I'm going to have to power up, and I'm going to still have to have energy after that meeting somehow. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've got any sort of top of mind suggestions, but I'd love to kind of stay with this in the sort of context of leadership.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a freelancer. I work on my own, so I've only got myself to drag myself down and power myself back up. Yeah, you're right. You can't always do that, but the knowledge that. So as Lisa Feldman Barrett describes it, we help manage each other's body budgets. So somebody else's expectations and demands depletes us because we're taking their demands and needs into our own assessment. So even if you can sort of mentally put a barrier, like, okay, I know that you're exhausting, and sort of protect yourself a little bit, that's a good way to know that you have. They don't have to drain you.
No, I'm taking from what you're saying. I mean, this is a source of knowledge and information that we're getting. And if we tune it out, then it's not available to us. We could tell ourselves a different story, couldn't we? Yeah.
Yeah, or you can just, once you know the things that energize you, you can say, okay, well, I've got to have this awful away day with this person. You can sort of schedule in some time to rest and recharge in whatever way works for you. And obviously it's different for some people want to go and lie in a flotation tank and close their eyes and go to bed, hide under a blanket, whatever. Other people want to go for a run, other people want to hang out with their friends, but knowing how to sort of get yourself back, put yourself back together afterwards is kind of important. So just also being curious about that. Well, what makes me feel good? How can I fit more of that in?
Being intentional.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, the ability to understand your needs, I think, rather than wants is so crucial for modern life, isn't it? And if you don't have that sensitivity to that information, it's not available to you, really.
Exactly. And to be able to see, to separate the wants from the needs. And that doesn't mean you don't do the wants, So, for example, you could eat a meal, you can notice when your interoceptive signals of fullness have kicked in. I don't need to eat any more of that. And, you still have the urge to eat dessert. Okay, is that because you want the pleasure? Doesn't mean you say no. Pleasure's an important feeling too, and it makes life worth living. So if you say, do you know what? I am full, but I fancy a chocolate mousse. Eat it for the pleasure. But just mindlessly going, I shouldn't, but I'm going to.
Yeah.
Then you have the guilt and the shame. That's a whole other load of feelings you don't need to have. So, yeah.
I have no shame eating chocolate mousse.
Neither. I think it's very...
John tries to shame me when I eat it, but...
That's very unfair.
Yeah.
Very unfair. I'm just trying to help you.
Energize my cells, cellular energy.
I definitely still reach for a chocolate biscuit when I'm stressed, and then an hour later when I'm on the sofa going, I don't feel good. Right. I think, well, I knew I wouldn't. Doesn't mean in the moment that's what I needed to get me through.
Yeah, so, I just care about Scott's mitochondria. I mean, they're
exactly. It's very kind of you. Yeah. You're managing his body budget.
What about the microbiome? I was curious about that because you write about that as well, right? The sort of role of the sort of gut microbiome and its influence on all of this.
Yeah, so what's really fascinating, so people know about the microbiome now. It's been a thing for a while, and we know that, it affects mood. But I think what is less known is that things that are being secreted by the microbiome in your gut affect your cravings for food as well as mood. So there's all kinds of stuff going on. There are cells within the gut that have a direct line via the vagus nerve up to the brain that are like, okay, you've had enough of this now, you need to have some more of this. And the microbiome is very involved in that in ways that we're just beginning to understand. And so that sometimes can rewrite the pathways in ways that make us crave things against our will. So yeah, they're really, really important. The kind of frustrating thing about the microbiome is everyone wants to know, okay, what should I be taking? What 5 weird tricks should I do to get a great microbiome? And the answer really comes down to eat a diverse, varied diet, lots of fiber, because that's what gives you a nice, diverse microbiome. Ultra-processed foods, not so much. You end up with a much less diverse microbiome. And the ones that should be eating the fiber that you're not eating start sucking into the mucus lining of the guts, and then that all causes all kinds of problems, inflammatory reactions, all these kind of things. So yeah, they're a really important and kind of emerging source, because they talk to each other. You need to have these diverse ones because one makes something that the other one eats, and then it metabolizes something that then tells you to do this. And yeah, I kind of fascinated because you think about, people talk about the gut as the second brain, but these microbiome, they're almost like the third, because they're calling the shots in ways that we don't even realize, making us feel things and want things. And it's kind of speaking.
It's kind of interesting idea to imagine this kind of other being inside you doing all of that.
Yeah, all they ask for is a bit of fiber and a nice varied diet, and they'll be nice to you.
So you mentioned Sarah Garfinkel and Hugo Critchley, and then they're incredibly important in this whole world of interoception research, and they've kind of done so many pioneering studies. Can we talk about a few of those and why they're important?
Yeah, so Sarah Garfinkel got into the idea of what does the body mean, because she was studying PTSD in veterans in the US, and she was trying to study their anxiety levels, and she was like, well, hang on a minute, you can't ignore these physical changes in their bodies. They're very much a part of the experience. The racing heart, the not being able to breathe, the kind of need to run away or fight. So she started looking into that and became aware of Hugo Critchley's work. So he was doing a lot of really interesting stuff, looking at what the brain takes from the heartbeat. So he did the first neuroimaging studies that showed that the brain keeps tabs on the heart, and that affects how we think and how memory works and how we perceive, especially fear. And so they started working together on this. And she's gone on to do all kinds of really fascinating things. So as I said, the training studies that she did about, she noticed that when she was trying out the equipment for heartbeat detection, asking people to try and tune into their heartbeat and count number of beats in 30 seconds. She was testing the equipment. She realized that she was actually getting better at it over time. She thought, well, maybe you can train that. And if you can train people to be better at heartbeat detection, what does that do to their anxiety levels and their ability to control that? And so that led down this really interesting path. So a lot of the work has been done because of that beginning in the heartbeat detection. That's where interoception really started making a splash, because obviously anxiety disorders are rife, and telling people to think about things differently doesn't really help. We've still got massively rising levels. So maybe this body-centric approach could really help, and it does seem really promising.
Well, there's some really interesting things on children with autism and helping them.
Yeah, well, I think the study they did, the training study, was in adults with autism, and so training people so anxiety is often a problem with autism, and low interoceptive awareness as well, also in ADHD. And this can lead to a problem called alexithymia, which is, it's not a condition as such, it's a description of an inability to put names on your emotions. So you have a physical sensation, name on your physical sensations, and that's what they mean. So, when you feel something in your body, can you say, I am scared, I am anxious, And so that's a real problem in neurodiverse conditions. And so the first study was with people with autism, and training them to be better at detecting their heartbeat after a few sessions, I think it was 12 sessions, a lot of them were not qualifying for an anxiety disorder diagnosis anymore. And they followed up with these people a year later, and they still had these amazing effects. And they were saying things like, oh yeah, now I know when I feel my heart doing this, it's just this, and I don't let it escalate. And so people are able to put these two things together and then not let it get carried away. And then they've moved on to another really interesting thing, which is hypermobility. So people who have hypermobile joints, so you think double jointed, you have more stretchy collagen in your joints, which is why you're bending. So very common, 1 in 5 people, a lot of musicians, a lot of ballet dancers, obviously, gymnasts. If you have this stretchy collagen in your joints, you also have it in all of your blood vessels in your body. And so you have various reflexes so that when you stand up, for example, or all the blood goes to one area of your body, your blood vessels can contract to send that blood back to your heart. And if you've got very stretchy blood vessels, that's not as efficient. So you stand up, your blood tends to rush to your feet. Or if it's hot, the blood rushes to the surface of your skin. And what happens then, because the body has to keep blood flow going around. It's non-negotiable. You need to keep your brain going. You need to keep your body and your organs going. So the only way to get more blood flowing, or to get blood flowing better, is to increase heart rate. But if you're not interoceptively aware of what's causing that, then that can cause anxiety because there's no explanation for why your heart's suddenly beating faster. So a lot of people, like 1 in 5 people has hypermobile joints. A lot of people also have anxiety, and there's a huge crossover. So this is the work of Jessica Eccles, who works with Sarah Garfinkel and Hugo Critchley. She's at Sussex as well. So they did the training study with people with hypermobility, the same thing. So I spoke to kind of the people who were in the study, and they say, oh yeah, it doesn't stop it happening, but it means I know what it is. And I think if I just sit down and do some breathing, if I just wait for it to pass, it doesn't take over. So people were saying before they'd had these what seemed like totally random panic attacks out of the blue. Now it's like, okay, maybe I just stood up too quick. Maybe I ate too much and all the blood's in my stomach. So having that extra level of explanation takes it away.
Well, I think there's a flip to all of this, which what's the consequences of not tuning into your body, of having, sort of like just living in your brain and so on.
Yeah. And are we getting worse at it?
Yeah. Well,
I try and make the case that we are. I mean, it's impossible to know really, but I think the fact that the outside world is so attention grabbing that you can either pay attention to the outside world or the inside world. You can't do both at once. But the fact that the outside world is so there's interesting studies with the Hadza people in Tanzania that hunter gatherers. They describe their emotions. This is a Lisa Feldman Barrett study actually. They describe their emotions as, my heart was pounding in my chest. I felt very hot. Whereas an American comparison group were like, I was humiliated and I was thinking this, it was all very mental.
Yes. Interpret it.
Yeah.
Immediately, yeah.
And the good thing about the sort of Hadza way of doing it is that you have that thing, you see the line, you go, ah! And then you leave it in the moment and you go back to your fire and having a nice, you don't carry it with you as a, you're not replaying it over and over. It's just like, that was a feeling, that was perfectly normal.
I'm interested in the kind of relationship there with rumination, and a lot of people are suffering from this sense of like these ideas or thoughts or feelings keep on going through their head and they can't deal with it. Does interoception play any part in helping us to rethink that?
Yeah, I think rumination is the classic of just being in your head and the body's not even involved. And this is one of I have 2 toxic stress strategies. One is hiding under a blanket and hoping it all goes away, and going to sleep, which I think is like a bankrupt body budget situation. It's just like, I can't cope, shut down. The other one is just, is rumination. And, this is not a new suggestion because it's a common thing in sort of anxiety therapy and thing, but really just deliberately going, okay, the classic one is name 5 things you can see, 5 things you can hear, 5 things you can, but also 5 things that you can feel in your own body. And I tried this myself the other day when I was out on a dog walk, and actually from feeling very much behind my eyes and tense and like my head was going, by the end of it, I was like, okay, I can hear the bird song, I can feel my feet, I can feel my breathing. And suddenly it puts you back in your body or in your whole You're a whole being without wanting to sound too out there. You know, you're one whole person. You're not a head that's going bonkers and a body that you're just dragging around. You're sort of, it puts you back. You know who you are again. And yeah, there's something really kind of powerful about that, yeah, it just makes the world make a bit more sense.
Because one of the challenges actually that a lot of us feel is not whole. We feel the opposite to that. And I'm just wondering because you've just given us a really nice little practical technique. Is there other things that we can be doing to get better connection with interoception?
Well, I mean, I hate to hark back to my previous book, but movement, you know, you can't move your body without changing the signals. So these signals are, you know, they're fluid, they're dynamic, they're changing all the time. And the easiest way to change them, I mean, obviously you can change your breathing, but you can also move your body. And so this is sort of what led me into interoception, because there's all the fascinating research that if you increase the strength and flexibility of your body, that changes the sort of underlying interoceptive signals that sort of builds to the self of who you are and what you can accomplish in the world. So you feel stronger, you feel more agile. And also, even if you're feeling low energy, it might be that you're a bit lethargic. You've just been sitting around all day and, you know, been stuck in an airless room doing meetings. Even just a quick walk around the block, you know, that sets, you know, it changes the signals that are going in, and so that changes the way you feel. So that's one of the easiest ways to do it. Yeah.
Excellent. I mean, if you were locked away in an endless meeting and you were starting to feel that, you know, disconnection with your body, what would might you do in the moment, do you think?
I think turning your attention to what's going on. I mean, sometimes it might be important to not be thinking about what's going on in your own body and to pay attention to what's going on in the room. But if you feel yourself zoning out, then, you know, any way of just feeling more present in your body, whether, I don't know, I'm a fidgeter, tap your feet, you know, whatever gets you feeling a bit more alive and vital and in your own body, and not in your own head, will probably help you get through that experience. I mean, part of the problem with modern life, I think, especially in the workplace, is it's so distracting and it's so mental. We're sitting down, we're not moving. You've got the screen in front of you, and there's been it was sort of not study in a lab, but done by an ex-Microsoft professional who decided to just look, I wonder what happens if you measure how people are breathing when they're sitting at a desk checking their emails. And they sort of forgot they were breathing, and they slowed down breathing, and they held their breath, and they weren't breathing effectively. And so that's something that we probably all do. If you're checking your emails, you're probably not doing some good breathing. So just even connecting with your breathing helps you get back into your body and sort of send a little bit of oxygen to your brain as well, which is going to...
Email apnea.
Yes, exactly. And I don't know whether that's ever been followed up in a proper study, but we do know that the way you breathe really affects alertness. It affects how there's a sort of connection between the top of the nose and the way your brain waves are working. So the sort of breathing in through your nose entrains the kind of rhythm of your brain waves. And so how you're breathing really matters. So even if you can't do anything else, you're stuck, what you can do is you can very subtly take control of your breathing.
I love this conversation so much because, you know, one of the ambitions of this show is to help people create more human leadership. And that's predicated on developing awareness. And we have an awareness crisis, right? And there's lots of layers to that, right? What am I feeling? What are the frames I'm holding up to the world? But this part of the conversation is largely missing. Like, what am I physically sensing, and how is that affecting my whole lived experience, my leadership, my impact, and all of that kind of stuff? And during a break when we were talking, you mentioned, you know, as we're drawing attention to this important topic, we're getting worse at it likely because the outer world is coming at us so fast and we're so connected to it on our devices that we're actually not paying attention as much. So what are some watch outs besides maybe the obvious, like put the phone down?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, isn't it? So I think it's become a thing that you're in a waiting room, you've got some time, the first thing you do is check your phone. So yeah, the world is coming at us. I mean, I think that because we are in a situation that's never been quite so much information coming at us as now. You've got the 24-hour news, you know, you've got people turning off the news because they're feeling overwhelmed from it. You know, you've got notifications coming at you on your wrist, and it's a lot. And you can your attention is really important in interoception. So you can either put your attention on the outside world, or you can put it on the inside world. It's, you know, you have to flick back and forth between the two, but you can't feel and pay attention to both at once. So if there's all this stuff on the outside, we're going to be by default numb to the inside. So there's really interesting research on modern hunter-gatherers in Africa, the Hadza people. And this was Lisa Feldman Barrett's work again, asking them to describe their emotions or what they're feeling in certain stressful situations and other situations. And they tended to describe it in terms of physical sensations. So my heart was beating really fast. I felt really hot. I couldn't breathe, whatever. Compared to an American comparison group who would talk about feeling overwhelmed and, just awful. And I was anxious and they described it in very cognitive terms. And so the benefit of having it in a physical term is that, like the potty training example, you feel that, it serves its purpose, you go back to baseline. Whereas if we've got this kind of constant mental stress going on that we don't really feel or deal with, it just can continue for longer. So I think it's probably safe to say, although without a time machine we can't be sure, that this time we are probably less tuned into our bodies than ever before.
Makes sense. I remember in your book from The Way We're Working Isn't Working, which was published 12 years ago, you cited some research about, I think from Harvard psychologists who said we're the most over-informed, under-reflective civilization in history. And it's only gotten exponentially worse since then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I think about the moments in the week which I most regret is when I fall down the doom scrolling thing and
Claw your way out.
And something lures you in. Somebody sends you something that's really interesting, and then you have one moment of gratification, then half an hour has passed, and the guilt and shame that comes along with the fact that you've wasted all that time. And thankfully, it's not too much, but I can feel like the gravitational pull into that, and how disconnected you feel as a result.
Your own body budget.
Yeah. So and there's been studies done on that people have fallen into the scroll hole, and when the researchers have brought them back out of it and said, what were you reading about and how did it make you feel, they're like, I don't know, complete numbness. It's like you're just you're not even.
And they also think they think they've been there for 5 minutes, but they've been there for half an hour or an hour or something.
They've no idea.
Yeah, that's really strange.
And I think the younger generation, I mean, possibly because I have a teenager, I see this all the time. If there's any second where he's not doing something, and I probably do this a bit as well. First thing you do, reach for the phone, play a game, scroll. No, it's like we don't ever take the time to reflect and sit back and go, how am I feeling and what do I need? Because that's always there as a kind of like tide you over until the next thing that you have to respond to.
So in this book, which is absolutely brilliant and loved it, was there anything that really surprised you when you look back at it?
I think the amount of importance of connections between people and how that affects how you feel on the inside. So there's been some really interesting research about affective touch. So this is like stroking, gentle stroking, which doesn't sound like it's in the wrong situation, a bit creepy, but
I'm feeling very anxious now.
It's not working.
That's where your predictions come in. Like, is it who's doing it and why are they doing it? But that seems like touch seems like something that's exteroceptive, it's external. But we have these specific pathways in the skin that head to the insular, so they are counted as interoceptive because it's telling you something about the homeostatic situation that you're in and how well you're coping. And so we have these connections between our skin and the brain, and they only respond to slow, gentle stroking at a particular human body temperature at 3 to 10 centimeters per second, which you don't have to worry about because it turns out we're all just hardwired to know how to do it. They're there, that's how we do it. And these fire when we're being gently stroked by another human being, and they give us feelings of safety and warmth, and just that action can downgrade this pain, so you can cope with more pain, you feel more supported, you feel loved, you feel warm, that sort of thing can really help everything from addictions to pain to fatigue. So that the need for other people to help us feel things, I think, was really, really surprising to me. And also in terms of loneliness, we had this big loneliness crisis how much we need other people to help us, even for our energy levels as well. Just the presence of someone who cares about us, or even a dog, it turns out, in the room, if you like dogs, can help people to exercise for longer before feeling exhausted, to dig deeper into their reserves, to cope with more pain. Dogs, weirdly, in the pain experiment, were more reassuring and more supportive than a friend, possibly for the reason that if there's a friend there and you're in pain, you want to reassure them that they're okay because they're worried about you. Whereas a dog, they're just there to support you and you don't have to reassure them. But this comes back to the predictive element of it. If you are aware that you've got backup, then you can dig deeper into your own resources, and this kind of escalation of these sensations doesn't have to happen quite so much because you're not on your own. And so the idea that interoception isn't just about getting to know yourself on the inside, wisdom of your body from within, it's about people around you as well, I think.
It's fascinating, yeah.
Well, that it's instinctive too, like you said. We just kind of know how to do it.
How to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are some people, I think it's quite fun that there are some researchers working on machines that you can strap your arm, wearables that sort of have this kind of soft, fluffy brush, and they stroke you at the right pace. And people say it's like having a lovely teddy bear, and people find it really calming and relaxing.
What do you think's next in this field? What are the things that you're excited about that you think are coming?
So I think the really exciting thing is the treatments that are going to come through for these common body-brain conditions that are so far really difficult to tackle. So everything from fatigue to IBS, anxiety, pain, all these things, eating disorders, which is the most deadly mental health issue. But so I talk in the book about the emergence of something I called body mental health, which is a look at rather than going, okay, how can we therapy people out of this by getting to think differently? What can we do to change these signals and the back and forth? Whether that's by one thing I tried, which is very much in the research stages, is swallowing a vibrating capsule so that you can feel it vibrating in your stomach. How does that affect people's relationship with their stomach sensations, whether it's in eating disorders or whether it's in IBS? How can you then train people to be more or less sensitive to what's going on in their stomach in a way that might alleviate their symptoms? Flotation therapy for anxiety, for addictions, for eating disorders again, because that by default, if you're floating in the dark in a tank where your body is supported, it's at room temperature, you can't feel anything or sense anything from the outside world, you go inside. How does changing that, boosting that interoceptive awareness, help people to get back in touch with their bodies and then have another way to regulate themselves so that they don't have these sort of maladaptive things going on? Even maybe drugs to change heart rate might be useful in some situations. So there's also Hugo Critchley has some really interesting research where treating people with arachnophobia, pictures of spiders coming up on the screen, if he timed the pictures to come up on the screen as the heart was contracting during a treatment, so exposure treatment, that was more effective than just than the standard exposure treatment. So you can get there faster because you're sort of giving your brain the signals when it's going to react most, and so you're sort of fast tracking. So there's all these kinds of things.
Could I get over my fear of heights? Because I realized it's gotten worse. As I went skiing the other day, and I didn't want to go up the bigger mountain because I didn't want to get on the ski lift that was steeper. Is there anything? Could I fix that potentially?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, yes. Anything, because that fear reaction is a visceral reaction. So changing a relationship with that visceral reaction could, in theory, do a lot. Because clearly going up on there and going, don't worry, it's fine, don't worry, it's fine, isn't going to help. So maybe changing that.
So we're going to go up the Shah this afternoon, and we're going to just lean over a bit.
Oh, gosh.
Yes, just lean against the window.
I already feel myself activating. I'm aware of it. My heart rhythm's changed.
Yeah, and so one of the things is, so exposure therapy, if you can get people, this is already a thing, it already exists, if you get people in that situation where they feel these heightened emotions and they stay there for a while and nothing happens, that can help to, you get through that. And then but equally, the other side of it is, can you get people, so flotation therapy, you are more sensitive to your heartbeat, but you're physiologically in a very relaxed state. So you can do this outside of a flotation tank, after yoga or whatever, lie in corpse pose, let your body really, really calm down, feel your heart. If you can become more tuned into your heart when it's calm and safe, And I find it really like just comforting, like an internal hug. If you can get that sensation, then you feel your heart in safety as well as in terror. Then that can give you a safe home to come back to. So you have a range of sensations to do with your heart that isn't just so it's like experiencing it at that end and at that end, and ideally having access to it in between as well.
What have you changed in your life as a result of what you've learned from this process?
I have spent a lot more time in flotation tanks than ever I possibly can. Absolutely love that if I'm feeling really awful. But I mean, it's not as accessible as it might be. I think I've just become much more aware. So once when I did several flotation tank sessions as part of my research for this, I found I came to my heartbeat happy place. I know that I can just feel it. And so I've got in the habit of, as I drop off to sleep, I just tune into my heart, and I find that just calms me right down and sends me off to sleep. But I also notice how things make me feel, how people make me feel, how stupid things, trying on a new outfit. Do I feel like good in it? Does it make me feel? Yeah, I'm a bit embarrassed. Just noticing that you have this thing. But I think one thing I really want to say, which I think is important for people to know, is there's a lot of talk in the wellness space about the wisdom of the body and tuning into it. And I watched apple cider vinegar recently, which kind of set my teeth on edge, because there was a lot of talk about there. I learned to listen to my body and the wisdom of my body from within. It's also important to realize that sometimes what's coming from within might not be in your best interests and might be wrong. Just as your eyes can deceive you, so can your internal senses. So this curiosity is a really important piece, because you don't want to be saying, well, my body feels fine, so I don't need that treatment the doctor's giving me. I push away Western medicine. No, it's about having it as a factor that you consider in your life.
Yeah.
It doesn't take over, but it's there. And I think a lot of people, including me before, didn't ever factor it in. And now I am doing it. It's another aspect to life.
And would you say there's a difference between how men and women react to their internal signals?
So there is some research into this, and I think women, I think I'm right in saying this, women are less interoceptively aware. So there's a researcher called Jenny Murphy who's doing research on this. And I think it very much depends. Get Jenny Murphy on, she'll tell you all about it. But she's doing research, and she's also doing research because the other thing about interoceptive signals is they change as your body changes. So changes in life like puberty and menopause and, all these things affect these signals. And so I've always been fascinated as a woman as like, why do hormones make you tearful and ragey? What's going on? That's a change in the interoceptive signals, but what that's going on, I'm not really sure. And so Jenny Murphy is doing research into that to see what the gender differences are all about and what's behind them. So I think that's a really fascinating place.
Do you know if people who are maybe more in tune with their interoceptive signals are more likely to act on gut instinct?
Well, yeah, there's a really interesting guy I met doing this called Chris White, who used to be a hostage negotiator. So he worked with the Metropolitan Police for many years. He used to be flown all over the world and parachuted in, probably literally, I don't know, into crisis situations to try and sort things out. And you might think that that's a skill where you need to be cold, rational thinker. You don't let emotions get in the way. You just, think about do the job. But when Sarah Garfinkel tested his interoceptive awareness, he was off the chart. So average person is sort of like 60% score on this test. He was 100%. And when I spoke to him, he said, I can feel my heart beating just sitting here now. He said, I'm not always aware. It's there if I need it. It's always there. And he says that he uses that as a source of information. So in a hostage negotiation situation, he will notice very subtle changes in his heart rate, blood pressure, and use them as signals to know when to intervene. So if you time it wrong, you've got somebody who's really het up. If you time it wrong, they're going to shut down and the whole thing fails. But if you time it right and you can tell, you have this gut instinct about which way this is going to go, then you can get in, you can make a rapport with somebody, and this is relationship building again. You can get things done. And so he very strongly believes that his strong interoceptive abilities make him much better at what he does.
It makes sense to me.
Interestingly, though, he said, well, never try and go for dinner with a bunch of hostage negotiators, because we cannot make a decision about where to eat, because they're all so sensitive, like, and in everyday life, he's probably, he's oversensitive, he thinks, if anything.
Yeah.
But in that role, you need that. And also there's been some research with trading, financial traders on the floor who are not quite like the hostage negotiator. They're like 80% on the test, so way above average. And they use their gut feelings to inform trades. So, these trades are happening at, lightning speed, and you have to make these decisions. And sometimes, there's not time to think, okay, that was going up, that was going down. It's just like, okay, that's good, that's bad, okay, boom, 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 boom. And the people who were better at interoceptive sensations, or more accurate or more aware, were much better. They were more successful on the trading floor, and they stayed in the job for longer, which is a high stress job. So there are advantages to being highly tuned in.
So let's come back to decision making and stressful situations and its impact, because you did some research around Dutch police officers I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. So there's some research in Holland with Dutch police officers. So one of the problems with police officers is it's a very obviously stressful environment. And what you're asking people to do is to go against all their instincts. So when you feel the fight or flight response kicking in, you're going against that. You approach the danger. And so it's a very stressful thing to do for people. And it's all very well saying to people, well, we need to work on well-being for our officers, and they should all go and do mindfulness. But that's a very different thing. Being able to regulate yourself when you're already calm is different to being able to regulate your stress response when you're up against a rioting mob. Mm-hmm. So what this research tried to do, it's called the Decisions Under Stress Training, DUST. They worked at this virtual reality training game where the officers are in an immersive game in a darkened car park, and they've got a fake gun with them. And their job is to shoot the zombies. The zombies are going to come out of nowhere. You need to shoot them. And they're plugged into the game with their heart rate monitor. And it's measuring heart rate variability, which is a measure of your body's ability to cope with stress and regulate stress. So if your heart rate variability is high, you're regulating stress very well. If it's low, then you're in fight or flight. And so this was like a biofeedback game. So if they were regulating their stress well and their heart rate variability was high, the game would get lighter and it was easier to shoot the zombies. If they found themselves getting stressed and getting into fight or flight mode, it got darker, it got harder to shoot the zombies. So it was like a feedback. What you want to be is unstressed and regulating yourself and still being able to shoot the zombies. And I think it's just really fascinating because it really helped the officers to learn to regulate their stress in a stressful environment, or a very good mimic of a stressful environment, so that they could then take that back into their job. And the officers loved it. And I think it's also possibly really good for young males. We've got this mental health crisis with young males. If they could learn to regulate themselves in an enjoyable, realistic situation, that might be something really worth having. Yeah. But you're also learning it sort of implicitly without really realizing what's going on.
Is there any kind of commercially available biofeedback techniques like that you can get hold of, do you think?
Not yet. I did try and ask the researcher if I could borrow a version of this to try on my teenage son and get him to road test it. But no, not yet. But it's still very much in research. Yeah. But there are people, say Sarah Garfinkel's work, they're working on an app to be available that can help you train heart rate detection. So things are starting to get to that stage. We're not quite there yet, but I think in the next few years we're going to see this really become a big thing.
Yeah. Well, this is all part of flagging that, because I think you're one of the voices at the forefront of something that's going to become very big and significant. We've felt this for a long time, so it's great that you're publicising it. So, what else are you going to be up to in terms of taking your work in this book out into the world?
Well, I will talk about it to anyone who will listen, and even if they don't, I'm just going to talk to them anyway. So I've been doing that all year, and I'm hoping that people get it for how important it is and what a shift it is in the way we think. Because as soon as you get people thinking about it, like, well, of course your body is important. It's just like part of the issue is the name, interoception. Once you get past that, but then not so long ago, microbiome was a term that you only heard about if you were a science journalist or a science doing research. And that's come into more sort of public sphere and everyone's talking about it and understands what it means now. So I'm hoping that's where we're going to go with interoception, because it really is important, I think, for kind of regulating us, just surviving in a world that's increasingly feeling a bit bonkers. I think we need to get back to being full humans rather than a brain on legs. I think it's kind of really important for us.
Absolutely.
Well, I also think, you benefit from this as an individual, but, for what we can help our children to learn this from an early age might help them overcome a number of, fairly significant milestones.
Yes. And so there have been some studies with children teaching parents how to respond to their children, and just simple things like naming their emotions. Like, it looks like you're frustrated right now. I can see that you're angry. Just helping them to name their emotions, and then they make that connection in their body. That's been shown to help with behavior and with preventing mental health issues from coming along later, because if they know what they're feeling, it's not going to be a horrible surprise when they get to be teenagers and they're feeling a lot. How to make sense of that and name it and know that it will pass. That's a really important thing. And it helped the parents as well. The parents felt they had a better relationship with the children felt better, they weren't acting out so much, everyone benefits. So, yeah.
Given we're in the kind of age of anxiety, this would be a very powerful thing for everybody to learn. So
It's timely.
Caroline, thank you.
Thank you
It's
very
been a
much.
brilliant conversation.
Yes, definitely order your copy right away. This is a great book. It's timely and it's accessible, which is what I really loved about it as well. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.